4 words can decide everything. Something critical is happening on American roads, and most drivers still don't realize how fast a normal traffic stop can turn into a gateway to a criminal record. What starts as a broken taillight or a rolling stop is increasingly turning into long questioning, surprise searches, and sometimes arrests, not because the driver did something violent, but because the driver didn't know the legal boundaries. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people lose their rights politely. They lose them by being nice. They lose them by talking too much. They lose them by saying sure when they didn't mean search my whole car. And once you give up a right, you usually don't get it back on the roadside. You only learn you gave it up months later in court with lawyer bills stacking up. So stay with me. Because if you misunderstand even one of these 4 phrases, it can cost your freedom, your money, and your future. Hit like, subscribe. Let's break down what every driver needs to know before the next time those lights turn on behind you. Let's start with the big idea in simple terms. A traffic stop is supposed to be limited. It has a purpose. The purpose is usually to handle one thing, like a warning or a ticket. Most drivers think the stop lasts as long as the officer is standing there. But legally, that's not how it works. In many situations, once the officer has finished the original reason for the stop, once the warning is issued or the ticket is written, the legal authority to keep you there often ends unless there's a new, lawful reason. That's why officers often keep the conversation going after the real stop is already finished. Not always casually, often strategically, because the gray area after the ticket is where many constitutional problems happen quietly. A driver thinks, I'm being respectful. The officer thinks, I'm seeing if I can build suspicion. And the longer you stay, the more chances there are for a search, a mistake, or a new accusation. That's why the first phrase matters so much. The first phrase is not rude. It's not aggressive. It's a clarity switch. It forces the stop to have a clean end. Here are the 4 words that stop the entire fishing game cold. Am I free to go? Say it calmly. Say it like a normal adult. No attitude, no speech, just the question. Because it forces the officer to answer a legal question. Is this stop still happening, or am I allowed to leave? And this is not internet advice. The Supreme Court has addressed the exact problem. Officers extending a completed stop without proper reason. Here's a real story in plain English. In Nebraska, a driver named Dennis Rodriguez was pulled over for briefly driving on a highway shoulder. The officer did what the stop was for. He completed the traffic warning. That should have been the end. But then the officer kept Rodriguez there and called for a drug dog, even though there was no new reasonable suspicion to justify the extra delay. Minutes later, the dog arrived. Alerted, and drugs were found. Rodriguez was charged and convicted even though the original stop had already ended. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled that extending a completed traffic stop without reasonable suspicion violates the Fourth Amendment. In simple words, officers are not allowed to stretch a finished stop just to go fishing for something else. They need a real lawful reason to extend it. Now here's the trap. Many drivers don't know the stop is done, so they keep standing there, keep answering, keep chatting, and keep giving the officer time to generate new suspicion. Casual questions become tools. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Do you have anything illegal? Mind if I take a look? These questions are often designed to create an opening. When you ask, am I free to go? You remove the fog. You remove the gray zone. You force accountability. If the officer says yes, you leave. If the officer says no, then you know you're being detained, and now your next steps matter even more. Real life example line. The officer hands you a warning, then keeps talking like the stop is still going, asking just a few more questions. That's when you use, am I free to go? Now, cliffhanger time. What happens if the officer doesn't like that question? What if they keep pressing you anyway? That's where most people make the second mistake. They think silence is enough. They think if they just stop talking, they're protected. But the law is not that simple anymore. The second phrase is what makes your silence actually count. I plead the fifth. And yes, you should say it out loud, clearly, because silence without invocation can be twisted, and courts have said so. Here's a real case that shocked a lot of people. In Texas, a man named Genoveva Salinas voluntarily talked with police about a serious case. He answered questions for a long time. Then suddenly he went silent at a key moment, when asked about ballistic evidence. Prosecutors later argued his silence showed guilt. Salinas' case went to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled that because he never verbally invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, his silence could legally be used against him. Let that sink in. He thought staying silent protected him, but the court said the silence didn't get automatic Fifth Amendment protection because he didn't clearly claim it. That's why I plead the fifth matters. It turns silence from maybe suspicious into protected. It removes interpretation. It draws a bright line. It tells the officer, and later the court, exactly what you did and why you did it. Officers are trained to keep questioning if you don't invoke. Prosecutors are trained to exploit ambiguity at trial. And nervous silence can be framed as evasive, especially if you were talking before. You don't want your silence to become a story they write for you. So you say it simply, I plead the fifth, then you stop talking. Don't explain why you're invoking. Don't argue. Don't add a speech. Just stop. Real life example line. The officer finishes the ticket, then asks, so is there anything in the car I should know about? That's when you say, I plead the fifth. Now, here's the cliffhanger. Even if you invoke the fifth, some officers will keep pushing. They'll rephrase questions. They'll act friendly. They'll try to get you to just clear things up. That's when phrase 3 becomes your shield, because there's one thing that stops interrogation faster than anything else. Phrase 3 is, I want a lawyer. This matters because interrogation does not begin only in a police station. It can start on the roadside, with pressure, confusion, and fear. Many people talk themselves into trouble long before they ever see a jail cell. There's a famous Supreme Court case that explains this protection. In Arizona, a man named Robert Edwards was arrested and questioned about serious crimes. After speaking at first, he clearly requested an attorney. Police ignored that request and questioned him again later, and they got a confession. That case went to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that once a suspect requests a lawyer, questioning must stop until an attorney is present. That's the modern rule that protects people from being pressured into giving up their own case. But here's the catch. The request has to be clear, not maybe I should talk to someone, not do I need a lawyer, not I think I want one. You want a simple, direct line, I want a lawyer. Say it once. If they keep pushing, repeat it, then stop talking. This does two things. First, it shuts down the questioning pipeline. Second, it moves your protection into a place where your lawyer can defend you later. Because once you're talking under pressure, you can accidentally admit things that aren't crimes but sound like crimes. Or you can say something that can't be taken back. Real life example line. The officer stops asking traffic questions and starts asking personal questions like, why are you nervous? Or where exactly were you earlier? That's when you say, I want a lawyer. Now we reach phrase 4, the one people mess up the most because it feels rude, but it is actually the most important phrase if you want to keep your case alive in court. Phrase 4 is, I do not consent to searches. Consent is one of the most misunderstood parts of traffic stops. Many drivers think refusing makes them look guilty, but legally, refusing often protects you. Why? Because consent removes the need for justification. It can turn a questionable search into a lawful one with one word. Yes. And once you give consent, you usually can't undo it later. Courts look at consent all the time in suppression hearings, because if the search was based on consent, the evidence often stays in. Even if you didn't know, you could say no. There's a classic example in the reference script. In California, during a stop connected to an investigation, police asked for permission to search a car and consent was given. The search found evidence and the person was charged. The key point the courts have repeated: voluntary consent can make a search lawful even if the person didn't understand refusal was an option. That's why I didn't know I could say no usually doesn't save you later. So your job is to never let consent happen by accident. Officers might ask in a soft voice, mind if I take a quick look? Do you care if I check the trunk? You don't mind if I look in the glove box, right? Those are consent traps. If you answer like a polite person, sure, or I guess, you may have just signed away your Fourth Amendment defenses. Your response should be short, calm, and final. I do not consent to searches. Then stop. No debate, no lecture, no because. If they search anyway, you preserve the argument for court. If you consent, you may lose that argument. Real life example line. The officer smiles and says, if you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind if I look real quick, right? That's when you say, I do not consent to searches. Now here's the part that makes this powerful. It's not just 4 phrases, it's the order and timing. Use the right phrase at the right moment, and you shut down the whole escalation ladder. Here's the simple 20-second flow you should memorize. If the traffic reason is done and the officer keeps you there, ask, am I free to go? If questions start getting risky, personal, or you feel like anything you say can be used against you, say, I plead the fifth. If the pressure continues, if it becomes clear they are interrogating you, say, I want a lawyer. If they ask to search, say, I do not consent to searches. Notice what's missing: arguing, explaining, performing. You don't win roadside debates. You win by keeping your rights intact. Tone matters. Say these phrases politely but firmly. Imagine you're reading a sentence from a card. Calm voice. No anger, no sarcasm. The goal is not to beat the officer. The goal is to stop the legal damage. Now let's talk about the mistakes that ruin good cases, because almost everyone says the wrong version of these phrases first. Mistake 1, I guess, or I don't mind. That can be consent. Mistake 2, I'm not doing anything wrong. That invites more questions. It turns into, okay, then tell me where you were, who you were with, why you're nervous. You don't need to prove innocence on the roadside. Mistake 3, turning, "Am I free to go?" into an argument. Don't say, "You can't hold me." Don't say, "This is illegal." Just ask the question. Let them answer. Your calm is your shield. Mistake 4, silence without invoking. People think staying quiet is smart, but after Salinas, silence without a clear Fifth Amendment claim can become a problem in court. Mistake 5, do I need a lawyer? That is not the same as I want a lawyer. Be direct. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Most people lose their rights long before they ever see a courtroom. They lose them on the shoulder of the road with a polite tone, trying to be helpful. So memorize the 4 phrases now before you need them. Am I free to go? I plead the 5th. I want a lawyer. I do not consent to searches. These are not confrontational. They are preventative. They protect your record, your freedom, and your future. If this helped you, hit like so more drivers learn this before they learn it the hard way. Subscribe, because in the next video, we're exposing silent physical actions officers legally treat as consent, even when you never say yes. It's one of the most unfair parts of modern policing, and almost nobody's teaching it. And drop a comment. Which phrase do you think would be hardest for you to say in the moment? When you're nervous, lights flashing, and you just want to go home? Because practicing it now is what makes it possible later.